began to roll across the dry land of Burkina Faso. But this wasn't another aid-funded project or a foreign investment scheme. This was something different. At the center of the movement stands a 36-year-old man in a hard hat, gripping a shovel, eyes focused on the horizon. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, didn't just break ground that day. He shattered a narrative, one that said African nations must always wait, always borrow, always follow. Instead, he's building something for the future. Something massive, something alive. The project is simple on paper but radical in ambition. Africa's longest irrigation canal, a 1,200-kilometer lifeline that will stretch across Burkina Faso and connect to water systems in Mali, Niger, and possibly even Chad. It's a feat of engineering but also a vision. For decades, the Sahel region has been written off as too dry, too poor, too volatile. Traoré is rewriting that story. "We will build canals to feed our children," he said during the groundbreaking ceremony. "The West built railroads to take our gold. We will build water paths to grow our future." It wasn't just a speech, it was a statement of independence. Unlike most mega projects in the region, this one isn't tied to IMF loans, European conditions, or American advisors. It's being funded through Burkina Faso's own mineral revenues, crypto reserves, and direct partnerships with non-Western allies, including BRICS nations, Turkey, and the UAE. Technical input is coming from South Korean hydrologists, not from Washington, not from Brussels. That alone has made people take notice, but it's the scale that's truly hard to ignore. The trench is already being dug wider than most highways. Pumping stations under construction are the size of football stadiums, and yet the most impressive part isn't the hardware, it's what the project represents. For decades, agriculture across the Sahel has been an exercise in desperation. Rainfall is unreliable, wells run dry, climate change has pushed farmers to the brink, entire villages have been abandoned due to lack of water, and foreign donors have come and gone, offering short-term fixes without long-term commitment. But this canal changes the equation. It's not just about getting water to crops, it's about creating an ecosystem of resilience. The plan is to provide irrigation for over 40 million people. That means rice fields will thrive where there was once dust. Cotton and mango plantations will spring back to life. Smallholder farmers who used to dig with their bare hands are now forming cooperatives. They're being supported by government grants and guaranteed access to a stable water supply. And here's where the genius kicks in. Traoré is not just feeding people. He's laying the foundation for a new rural economy. Farmers become entrepreneurs, fields become exports, and jobs emerge where there was only survival before. Western media has tried to frame him as a populist, a firebrand, but he's not shouting, he's building. And people are responding. One of the most remarkable outcomes is what's happening in regions once devastated by conflict. The canal passes through areas formerly controlled by warlords and armed groups, but instead of resistance, there's cooperation. Some ex-combatants are laying down arms to become contractors. Communities once defined by violence are now working side by side to bring water to their soil. It's a transformation few thought possible. In the next 5 years, experts estimate Burkina Faso will see a 15% increase in rice production, thanks to satellite-guided irrigation. More than 5,000 jobs are expected to be created in tech and engineering sectors. But the real impact goes deeper. In rural areas, schools are introducing new lessons on irrigation management. Women's groups are overseeing cooperative water tanks. Local artisans are building canal gates from locally sourced materials. Even the funding model is decentralized. Each region owns equity in its section of the canal, making locals not just beneficiaries but stakeholders. It's a model of inclusion rarely seen in large-scale African infrastructure. And while Western think tanks publish skeptical reports questioning the project's sustainability, something undeniable is happening on the ground. Hope. You can see it in the eyes of farmers as they trace irrigation routes in the dirt. You can hear it in the voices of children who no longer have to walk for miles just to fetch water. And you can feel it in the momentum of a nation that's finally acting like it owns its future. Traoré's critics may scoff at the ambition, but he doesn't argue back. He just works. While others worry about bureaucracy, he's deploying solar farms to power the pumps, while environmental lobbyists debate, he's planting forests along the canal banks to protect the ecosystem. His leadership is rooted in one thing: results. This isn't about building a monument, it's about starting a movement. In the second part of this report, we'll look at how Traoré's irrigation vision is impacting regional diplomacy, attracting African expatriates back home, and forcing a new conversation about what development really means in the 21st century. Because this canal, this artery of hope cutting through the Sahel, is just the beginning. The first time you hear about Captain Ibrahim Traoré's irrigation canal, the instinct is to think local, Burkina Faso, the Sahel, water. But spend enough time tracing the edges of this project and you realize this isn't just national infrastructure. It's continental diplomacy disguised as concrete. The canal isn't only moving water, it's moving power, and the balance is starting to shift. For decades, African nations have been held back by the same pattern: dependence on foreign funding, loans with impossible strings attached, infrastructure designed by outsiders, serving outside interests. But this canal flips that script. Built with African labour, funded with local and non-Western capital, and designed for long-term sovereignty, it's forcing neighbours and rivals alike to rethink their place in the new order Traoré is quietly building. One of the most overlooked aspects of the project is its built-in diplomacy. Instead of isolating Burkina Faso, Traoré went out of his way to include neighbouring nations from day one. Before a single trench was dug, he signed water-sharing pacts with Mali and Niger. Discussions are underway with Chad. These agreements weren't symbolic, they were practical, preemptive solutions to disputes that have torn other regions apart. In a continent where water rights often spark conflict, Traoré used the canal to build alliances. The message was clear: this project isn't just for Burkina Faso, it's for the region, for all of us. That kind of thinking, collaborative, inclusive, unapologetically African, is rare in geopolitics, and it's catching on. At the same time, the canal is stirring something even more powerful: a return home. Over the past year, African professionals, engineers, agronomists, hydrologists, have been quietly leaving jobs in Europe, Asia and the US to come back to the continent. Many of them are Burkinabe expats who swore they'd never return. Now they're boarding planes, rolling up sleeves and walking to the canal line with pride. What changed? Traoré gave them a reason. He didn't lure them back with PR campaigns or glossy investment brochures. He gave them ownership, leadership roles, a voice in something real. For too long, Africa's best minds were told to export their talent to survive. This canal is proving that building at home isn't just possible, it's more impactful, more meaningful. Even foreign nationals, Pan-Africanists from Ghana, Senegal and Ethiopia, are applying to join the project. There's a quiet migration happening, a shift from brain drain to brain gain, from individual escape to collective purpose. But that purpose is drawing more than just talent, it's drawing scrutiny and pressure. As news of the canal spreads, so does discomfort among traditional global powers. Western governments, long accustomed to shaping Africa's development terms, are watching from the sidelines, frustrated, excluded, and increasingly alarmed. Not because the canal is reckless, but because it's working without them. It's not just the funding model that's making them nervous, though bypassing the IMF entirely is no small act of defiance, it's the political message. Traoré is showing that sovereignty doesn't have to mean isolation, that nations can build strong alliances without surrendering decision-making power. That aid isn't the only path forward. Think tanks in Europe are already releasing reports warning about the risks of unregulated growth. Environmental lobbies are asking how the canal will affect biodiversity. Journalists are questioning Traoré's long-term intentions. But none of these voices are coming from the people who will use the water. None are speaking to the farmers, teachers and nurses who now see a future where before there was only drought. And that's what makes Traoré dangerous, not to his people but to the system that once depended on their dependence. He doesn't fit the mould. A former military man with no Western education pedigree, no elite family ties, no offshore accounts. just clarity, grit, and a stubborn refusal to wait his turn. He's not interested in being celebrated in think pieces. He's too busy working, and the work speaks for itself. Across the Sahel, roads are being paved to service canal zones. Solar grids are being installed to power pumps and lighting. Reforestation projects are reclaiming land once written off as useless. Every metre of the canal is turning into a multiplier effect, pulling in opportunities not just for agriculture, but for trade, education, and community renewal. Women in rural communities are reporting a surge in local businesses. With reliable water access, they're launching soap-making cooperatives, growing vegetables, and even starting fish farms. What used to be months of hunger between seasons is now turning into year-round stability, not luxury, just life, dignified, secure, and earned. Meanwhile, schools along the canal route are shifting their curriculum. Instead of outdated colonial syllabi, students are learning irrigation science, local water law, climate-smart agriculture. Traoré's administration isn't just trying to feed people. It's training the next generation to run the system better than he can. That's not populism, that's vision. And while global media outlets debate whether Traoré's model is sustainable, something undeniable is unfolding in real time. A new way of governing, of building, of leading. One that doesn't ask permission to exist. One that doesn't measure success by how many World Bank grants are approved, but by how many children can drink clean water without getting sick. What we're seeing now is not just a canal project, it's a blueprint. One that says Africa doesn't have to be the story others write for it. It can write its own. With its own pen, in its own language, on its own land. And Traoré, he's not interested in applause. He's not tweeting. He's not making rounds on international forums. He's showing up every morning, talking to workers, inspecting trenches, asking engineers questions, not to micromanage, but to understand. Because he knows this project and everything it represents is bigger than him, bigger than Burkina Faso. It's the seed of a larger idea that the age of waiting is over. In the final part of this report, we'll explore how this canal, once seen as an impossible dream, could influence elections across the continent, reshape Africa's food independence strategy, and inspire a decentralized movement of local-led development. We'll also ask a critical question. Can this momentum survive global pushback? And what role will the African diaspora play in its defense? The world is watching. But more importantly, Africa is waking up. In the north of Burkina Faso, water flows through places once scorched by sun and forgotten by maps. But now, something else is moving with it. Not just crops, not just hope, but momentum. A quiet, undeniable momentum that's beginning to ripple beyond the canal and beyond borders. The irrigation project President Ibrahim Traoré launched is no longer just a national story. It has become a spark, and African nations are watching with growing curiosity and, in some cases, urgency. What happens when one country proves it doesn't need to ask permission to transform? What happens when a nation decides to stop borrowing and start building, without losing itself in the process? Across West and Central Africa, that question is starting to influence real political conversations. In Senegal, opposition parties are referencing Burkina Faso's canal model in their manifestos. In Niger and Mali, ministries of agriculture have quietly sent delegations to study the project up close. Even in places that once dismissed Traoré as a reckless soldier-turned-leader, there's now a second look, a re-evaluation, a sense that maybe something is shifting. And it is. At the heart of it all is a truth that's as uncomfortable for the global establishment as it is liberating for Africans. A new model is emerging, a model that doesn't begin with foreign consultants, that doesn't worship GDP graphs over grounded reality. A model that starts with the land, the people, and the question, what do we already have? That's how Traoré built the canal. Not from loans, not from elite foreign experts, but from Burkina Faso's own minerals, its strategic partnerships, and its youth, both at home and abroad. And this is where the African diaspora enters the frame. For generations, Africans living overseas were taught that helping home meant sending money. Western systems made sure they stayed comfortable enough to send remittances, but rarely empowered to return. The canal has flipped that logic. Suddenly going home doesn't feel like a retreat, it feels like a mission. Diaspora engineers, architects, teachers, even social workers are beginning to reframe their role. Not just as observers or donors, but as builders, participants, stakeholders in a new Africa that isn't waiting to be saved, but ready to be shaped. The challenge now is scale and resistance. The more this idea spreads, the more it threatens those who benefit from the status quo. Multinational agribusiness companies who profit from Africa's food dependency are beginning to voice concern. They argue that local irrigation disrupts the global grain market. Translation? Africa becoming food independent means someone else loses money. Diplomats in former colonial capitals are urging environmental reviews and multilateral oversight, not because they're worried about ecosystems, but because they're losing control of the narrative. Traoré didn't invite them in. He didn't give them credit. He didn't need to. And that, to many of them, is unforgivable. But the truth is, this canal wasn't built to please old powers. It was built to break old patterns. And it's working. In just 2 years, Burkina Faso has seen a 20% drop in imported rice. Agro-processing hubs are under construction in 5 regions. Rural youth employment has risen, migration to Europe has slowed, and families that once lived off rainfall are now building generational wealth, powered by water. Yet the most radical transformation isn't economic, it's psychological. People are beginning to believe again. That's the hardest thing to quantify, but the most powerful to witness. Belief, not in magic, not in politics, but in action, in work, in the idea that Africa can be the author of its own story, not just the character in someone else's plot. For the first time in decades, small towns in the Sahel are sending children to school not out of obligation, but because they see a future worth preparing for. Clinics are opening, community farms are expanding, new cooperatives are being formed by the month, and through it all the canal wins quietly. Not as a monument, but as a current of life. And here's what's wild. Traoré is just getting started. Plans are underway for Phase 2, integrating the canal system with AI-driven irrigation schedules, regional trade corridors, and solar-powered desalination plants. He's already working with partners in East Africa on similar initiatives. The dream is continental, a web of water, energy, and independence connecting the continent not through dependency but through dignity. But dreams require defense. The next phase will not be easy. There will be misinformation, economic pushback, possibly even sabotage. That's the reality of building outside the system. But that's also why this moment matters so much. Because if Africa can protect what it builds, if it can shield its progress from external disruption and internal doubt, then this canal will be remembered not as a miracle, but as a blueprint, a new path. And for those watching from afar, wondering what role they can play, the answer is simple. Tell the story, share the truth, and support the vision. If you're part of the diaspora, this is your time. Return if you can. Invest if you can't. Speak up. Push back against the old assumptions that say Africa can't, shouldn't, or mustn't lead itself. Because the tide is turning. Burkina Faso has shown us what happens when leadership is rooted in purpose, not posturing. When people are treated not as subjects, but as builders. When development isn't about charity, but courage. From dust and drought, a nation has carved a river. And from that river, a revolution has begun to flow. Now it's up to us, all of us, to make sure it doesn't stop here. If you've made it this far, here's what you can do next. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of the Burkina Canal project? Support the movement, like this video. If you believe Africa deserves leadership like this, subscribe to the channel for more truthful, in-depth stories about Africa's rise. Let's make sure the world knows Africa is not waiting. Africa is building, and this is just the beginning.